Welcome to the 299th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with Adam Leeb, co-founder and CEO of Astro House, the makers of the FreeWrite Smart Typewriter, a distraction-free writing device. And if you usually tune into this podcast to listen to interviews with writers or authors, which has been 298 episodes thus far, I would encourage you not to just delete this episode without listening. This is a really fascinating interview. And if you're a writer who has struggled with distractions when you're writing, looking at the internet and other distractions, you may want to take a listen to this interview with Adam Leeb, co-founder and CEO of Astro House and makers of the FreeWrite Smart Typewriter. Stay tuned for the interview. If you're new to audiobooks, they're the perfect way to get more books into your busy life. Listen to audiobooks during your commute, while doing chores, walking the dog, or just relaxing at home. All you need is a smartphone and the free Libro.fm app. If you already love audiobooks and don't know what to listen to next, check out recommendations and curated lists from people who know audiobooks best, your local bookseller. Reading and Writing Podcast special offer, get 2 audiobooks for the price of 1 with your first month of membership with code RWPodcast. That's code RWPodcast for 2 audiobooks for the price of 1 for your first month of membership at Libro.fm. Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. I have a special episode today. I'm not interviewing a New York Times bestselling writer. I'm interviewing someone who has built a device to help writers and authors and poets and screenplay writers create and write their latest works. Adam Leeb is the CEO of Astro House. Astro House developed and launched the FreeWrite Smart Typewriter device, and they have a brand new device launching, the FreeWrite Traveler. Adam, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Well, before we talk about Astro House's distraction-free writing devices, can you just give us a little bit of background about yourself? What was your background and career path before you started working on the FreeWrite?
Yeah, I definitely took a probably non-traditional route to making consumer electronics, but I graduated with a mechanical engineering degree with a focus in product design quite a while ago. But, you know, of course, as one does with that degree, I went straight into investment banking. So I worked in New York in investment banking for about 4 years. This was right at the peak of the recession. Got a lot of lessons through that experience. Ultimately decided that, you know, I knew it wasn't going to be a long-term career, and I left under my own volition, which was, you know, I was very fortunate to be able to do, and took a little bit of time off, and then actually started my first company, which was actually in nutrition. And that company, of all things, it's sort of, you know, I think of it like, you know, that's really where I cut my teeth in sort of, you know, real entrepreneurship. I mean, I'd been, you know, sort of, you know, selling stuff, buying and selling stuff for a long time, ever since, you know, even eBay started a long time ago. But my nutrition company was sort of the first time I really tried to put a product together from scratch and a brand together. That sort of petered out. And at the same time, when that was sort of kind of on the down, my co-founder Patrick and I came up with this idea for a distraction-free writing tool. And we didn't start working on it right away, but it sort of sat in the back of my mind as something that was super interesting. It just felt like it had all the makings of a really interesting project. I didn't think of it as some big product or something that I was going to spend the next 5 or 6 years on, but it did feel like it was super timely. It had some really interesting components. It allowed me to sort of get back into making things again. And also it seemed like a perfect candidate for Kickstarter. So that was what was super exciting to me. And I just, you know, eventually in December 2014 is when we launched our first Kickstarter, which was for the Hemingwrite project, which is what we called it back then. And super successful, and, you know, quite literally kickstarted our whole company into what it is today.
Well, that's a great story. Well, for those listeners who aren't familiar with your original FreeWrite Smart typewriter, can you describe what the FreeWrite Smart typewriter is exactly and how it differs from like a cheap laptop or a Chromebook?
Yeah, FreeWrite, we call it a distraction-free writing tool, and we did that very purposefully because we wanted to differentiate the product from really anything else, any other modern consumer electronic that people were using. So unlike a laptop or a tablet, there's no email, there's no browser, there's no notification. So there's really nothing to sort of pull you out of the writing process. And we thought that that was super important. We also went to sort of, more extremes. And instead of, we thought about the laptop as sort of this great multi-purpose tool. But at the same time, it doesn't have all of the best components for writing itself. So what we did in creating the FreeWrite is we put in a much better keyboard. So it has Cherry MX Browns, which are sort of like this really great tactile keyboard switch, mechanical keyboard switch. We put in an e-ink screen. So, I've been super obsessed with the Kindle ever since it came out. I'm a huge fan. I've probably sold more Kindles for Amazon than I'd care to like to admit, but it's just it has this great visual experience, very high contrast. It works outside and it looks like paper. And so, we're taking sort of these other technologies that have been used for other products and putting them into a new device that both marries the simplicity of old devices and with the fact that it's digital documents and your documents are then being saved and ultimately being uploaded to the cloud. And so that was the original concept for the FreeWrite. We really just wanted to provide sort of this ultimate drafting tool. And so within that, we also made it even more specific. So it wasn't even just that it was a writing tool, but it was also sort of this super specific tool for the drafting part of the writing process, because we didn't even allow people to do any editing. Like there are no real editing capabilities on the device other than the backspace key. There's no arrow keys. There's no copy and paste. There's no formatting. It's extremely, extremely pared down with the idea that you draft on this device top to bottom, and then you edit later in your computer. And so in that way, we weren't trying to, replicate or take away from, people's current, computer process. What we're trying to do is augment that with sort of this really specific tool that would be 100% focused on drafting and thus could really improve that experience and ultimately improve, people's writing productivity.
So I'm curious, have you ever given any thought to going back and updating the software to allow some arrow keys? Because I know that I've noticed people's comments online, and that's one comment that comes up quite often.
Of course, we've thought about it. The big shift since releasing the Traveler concept is that we are implementing arrow keys. And so there is, you can use the new plus WASD, which is, kind of how gamers typically use their arrow keys. But there is a way to sort of move the cursor around on the Traveler. And I think the reason that we did that is that I think one thing that we realized is that it's not all about this very specific creative writing process. And I think we wanted to open up the product for people that have not just different processes, but also they're writing for different types of, content. So I think, I'm really actually very curious to see how that changes the experience for customers. I really like the FreeWrite as it sits today. And I think there's some sort of magic to it in that it is so sort of extreme in the way that it was designed. And, even myself, like every time I use it, I kind of like have that experience where I'm like, oh, wow, this like actually works. You have to make that mental leap. And sometimes it takes like 30 seconds or a minute, or maybe even 2 minutes for your brain to sort of like switch off that like knowingness that it can't edit. And then once it sort of like remembers that that's not really a problem and you can just keep going, it really sort of unleashes this unusual amount of writing productivity that even I find it very hard to replicate otherwise. And so I'm hoping that the traveler still provides that experience, but I'm just not so, I'm not, I'm not eager to change free write, as it
Sure,
is today.
sure.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to circle back for a moment because we talked about earlier your career and how you were working with this nutritional company, or it was your company, um, and then you were working with your partner and had this idea for the original Hemming Write, which became the free write. And I just wonder, can you talk about the kind of gestation and the building process? Because it's one thing to talk about these devices and this distraction free writing device that people can purchase, but it's a completely different thing for a small company to design and build a consumer electronic device and have the kind of consistency of production. And I'm just wondering, first, can you talk about the original idea, and then also I wonder about kind of just the design and the manufacturing process to build multiples of these machines. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So the concept started as a conversation. And at the time, my co-founder Patrick and I were working. I was working on my nutrition company. He was working on a solar calculator widget. So, I mean, two things that could not be more different. But I think the thing that we connected on was sort of this love of productivity and process. And we just happened to be sitting across from each other in an incubator space in Detroit. And he was telling me about some distraction-free writing software that he used to just, write essays. He's very politically minded, and the essays that he wrote he found it really beneficial to use this software because it actually disabled the backspace key. And so when he told me that, I just thought that was the craziest thing. And I didn't know, like, I'd never heard of, I just couldn't even imagine why you'd want to do that. And so that really led us down this whole path of talking about this writing philosophy where you sort of draft top to bottom and then edit later in a separate session. And there's this, there's research, and there's a lot of people that, I've later found out that this is actually taught in most, if not all, MFA programs. And in some cases, they're actually taught, don't use punctuation, don't use capitalization, like just put the words on the page, don't use spell check. And, the idea being that you want to separate sort of this critical process from the creative process. And when you do that, it really helps you get into this, quote unquote flow state. And so I just thought that was such an interesting concept. And it really got me thinking to how I was taught to write, growing up. I'm not a professional writer by any stretch. I think everyone as a student, middle school, high school, college is forced, to write papers. And I think of myself as someone that I think I always struggled with that, especially having sort of like an engineering mind. And so, he was telling me about this process and, sort of at the same time, and this is, the weird way my brain works, but at the same time, I was thinking about making stuff, and it's like, wow, if you're using your computer with this software to sort of like dumb it down, and all these other writers are using this different types of distraction-free writing software, like how cool would it be if there was like a dedicated writing device that had this cool e-ink screen? Again, like I was obsessed with Kindles, had a really cool mechanical keyboard because that was something I'd also been looking at, and also had this seamless backup to the cloud. And so again, like also super obsessed with Dropbox and just how well it worked. So there were these three things that I was just, happened to be really interested in at the time. And sort of they all kind of came together in this initial conversation of like, how cool would it be to have this, distraction-free writing tool that incorporated these three really unusual elements that would make it very different than any kind of laptop or any other modern writing device or even vintage writing device. And so that was the original concept. We didn't do anything about it for a while. I think we sat on it for several months. We were both working on different projects. And at some point, both of our startups sort of were hitting the wall. And, this device had just this idea sort of just stuck with me. And so, I sort of brought it up to him again. I'm like, hey, like, would you want to work on this? Like, maybe we could put a prototype together and see what happens. And that was really as far as it got in terms of my thinking. Ultimately, we picked a hardware competition called Engadget Insert Coin to sort of give ourselves like a little bit of framework of, a deadline so that we could work towards. Otherwise, we could just spend forever, making prototypes and iterating and not really showing anyone. So we both knew that we had to put some framework around it to give ourselves some pressure. We entered this competition. Thankfully, the competition was not very well attended. We managed to, get to like the semifinalist or even finalist round. We ended up going to New York, and during that process, the concept went viral, and we got tons and tons of press, both domestically, internationally. We got tons of people writing into us and telling us how much they loved it, how much they hated it, everything. And that really just kind of spurred us on and said, we were like, well, there's something here. We don't know what, but let's do a Kickstarter and see if people are really willing to pay for it. And so we quickly put together a Kickstarter over 4 or 6 weeks. We launched this December 10th, 2014, and we ended up raising $200,000 in the first 20 hours of the campaign, which was very exciting. And, very quickly we went from, wow, this is going to be a fun project to like, oh God, we actually need to figure out how to make this thing. And as you can imagine, so my background is a mechanical engineer, his background software engineer. Those two things are a lot, but they're not nearly enough to make a full scale, custom consumer electronic device and mass manufacture it. So we had a lot to figure out. We had a lot to learn. We had to create the electronics. We had to, hire people. We had to create a brand and websites and e-commerce and so many different things. I spent a lot of time in China. And then there's a whole product development process that we went through basically from January 2015 to when we first had units in hand, I think February or March of 2016, and then ended up shipping sort of all of them out, I think around April of 2016. So it took us a little over a year. And actually in hindsight, I realized how fast that was, given that was our first project. But it's a long, tedious, complicated process. And it really requires working with a lot of different types of people, a lot of different types of engineers and experts across, multiple different fields to get it all across the finish line.
And were your Kickstarter backers, were they patient as you went through that process?
The majority are, it's the silent majority that you have to sort of remind yourself exist, because you get a lot of feedback about people that are, angry, or they tell you that you're just stealing their money, or it's a conspiracy. There's a lot of conspiracy theorists. They try to piece together, little bits and pieces of things they hear online and say like, oh, this is the reason why they're not telling anyone about this, or like,
right.
Oh, here's this guy, like I saw him on Instagram and he's doing this thing, like that's why they're not working. Which they're actually hilarious because they're so far off base that it's pretty comical. But yeah, I mean, and it teaches you a lot. I actually did a lot of our sort of customer service, I think the first year. Mm-hmm. So I was the one that was responding to everybody's comments, and I was trying to build the thing at the same time, which I would not recommend anybody do.
Yeah, that sounds nightmarish, to be honest.
It is. And now, honestly, like I'm very militant about not even opening my customer support portal. Like I really depend on our customer support person. I mean, we only have one person, but I depend on her to manage that and to like really shield the product team from sort of people's gripes, because it gets like, no matter how much you are, like, no matter how thick your skin, like it gets into your head. And even if you don't get upset, it just sort of takes your attention away from actually being productive. And so, yeah, I think you have to be super mindful of that and how it affects you. And, you know that you're doing the best you can, and ultimately that you're going to deliver on what you say. But
sure.
You just have to be super careful about it.
Because the reality is there are huge numbers of consumer electronic devices that are kickstarted that never see the light of day.
Definitely. Yeah. And because
you have exactly what you just described. You have people who've never gone through that process of all of the engineers, software, hardware, and then the mass manufacturing. And that's not a simple process.
No, by any means. And it requires us, if you're trying to make consumer electronics, I mean, you have to have engineers that are focused on, all these different disciplines, whether it's, electronic design, circuit design, PCB design, RF, EMI, certification, packaging, mechanical design. I mean, all of those things, you can do them poorly, but someone has to pay attention to them. And so, a lot of people just get tripped up because they don't realize how much goes into it and, how much one little feature or change ends up sort of trickling through the entire process and causes delays and, cost overruns and that kind of thing. And also, I mean, it can be hard to manage. I mean, without having good partners, I mean, we couldn't do this without good partners. That's just how it is. We could not hire an internal team to do everything. So that means we have to have partners. And so, and we've been, I wouldn't say burned, but we've had to fire partners before. And that's a really hard process, especially if you've never gone through that before. If you don't know, what is the right way that how are they supposed to be working right now? Unless you actually know that, it's hard to know, if they're steering you down the wrong path or, making too many mistakes or not having good project management. It's hard to know that without actually going through it before. So it's a very tricky path, but it's obviously not impossible.
Sure. So going back to the devices, we talked about it as a distraction-free writing device, and its primary use in your mind is for drafting new material with minimal editing functions. And you mentioned very briefly that the documents are uploaded to the cloud. Can you just talk about that a little bit more so that people listening have a sense of you're using this device, which is a freestanding device that appears to be somewhat similar to a mechanical keyboard with the e-ink screen so that you can see what you're typing. But then can you talk about the process of the cloud process?
Yeah, definitely. We designed the device so that it works very seamlessly with the cloud. And that doesn't mean that it entirely relies on an internet connection, because it doesn't. This is also something that was very important. I think some people misunderstand. So it works perfectly well whether you're connected or disconnected, because we want people to be able to write, wherever they feel inspired. And so both the Traveler and the FreeWrite have a Wi-Fi connection, but everything that you write is always saving in real time to flash storage on the device locally. And then later, when you're connected to the network, it is going to be backing up to the cloud. So it doesn't send everything there in terms of it leaves the device and goes to the cloud. It's backing up to the cloud. And that's a really important distinction. And the idea is that because it's a drafting tool, we wanted to make it so that you could very simply pivot to your computer to edit and publish and do all of the other things that you need to do, because we understand this is just a device for part of the writing process. Completely understand that. And so what we want to do is make it so that the writing process is very simple. You use the device to do your drafting. You draft ideally top to bottom. Now Traveler actually has some additional editing capabilities with the arrow keys, but still you're meant to be drafting top to bottom, and then you can have it sync up to either Google Drive, Evernote, or Dropbox, and you can then very quickly pivot and open your document right there in any of those three cloud services. You also can download it directly from our cloud service, which is called Postbox. So you can get a PDF, you can get a text document, you can send it specifically to one of those cloud services. But in its most simple form, it's you draft on the device and you open the document in one of those cloud services later to do all of your editing and eventually publish the document. So again, trying to remove as much friction from the writing process as possible. And you don't have to be connected, but when you do get connected the next time, everything's going to sync up and it's going to be exactly where you expect it to be.
Great. Well, as we've mentioned a few times, you're launching a brand new product, the FreeWrite Traveler. Can you explain the FreeWrite Traveler and how it differs from the original FreeWrite device?
So the FreeWrite Traveler is our latest product in now the FreeWrite line. So we started with the FreeWrite Smart Typewriter, as we mentioned, which, really introduced this entire concept of sort of a modern writing tool that's distraction free. And it had all these great elements, e-ink, mechanical keyboard, syncing it to the cloud. And we've had great success. We've had about 100 million words been written on devices worldwide. We've had, countless books and screenplays have been written on the device. And I think, as soon as we made the FreeWrite, it's a monolith. It's about 4 pounds. It doesn't fold. I call it like semi-portable. It's more sturdy than it is, super portable. And we consciously made those design choices. But I think even for myself, like I wanted to have something that I could still have that really focused, distraction-free writing experience, but also something that was very portable. And so that's really the gist of what Traveler is. It takes the best of sort of this distraction-free writing experience, and in most cases, the software is very, very similar, but it also puts it into a very small, slim, folding form factor. So the Traveler is about half the size of a laptop. It's around 1.5 pounds, and it's very, very easy to take it wherever you need to go. And so, and not only that, it also still has this great e-ink screen, and it has a new scissor switch keyboard with a lot of it has about 2.5 millimeters of travel, which is significantly more than any other laptop out there right now, and really gives you that great tactile experience. So, we did our best to create the best possible laptop style, scissor switch style keyboard, keep the e-ink screen. Of course, it still syncs to the cloud. And so, you're kind of getting the best of both worlds. And for the people that want to be able to take their, distraction-free writing device on the go very, very simply. And so, we're not stopping production of the original FreeWrite. We think of them as complements to each other, and we've had a lot of people purchase both. So we're really excited. I mean, I think we've been working on this product very, very diligently for the last 2 years almost now, which is hard for me to imagine, but we're really super proud of how it turned out. And I think like people are going to really find it to be super duper useful. I mean, for anyone that actually wants to be able to write a little bit more portably.
And was that the biggest design reason for developing the Traveler, was the portability?
Yeah. I mean, that is the key differentiator, I'd say, between FreeWrite and Traveler. There are some additional software features, as we've discussed, like it has the arrow key functionality, and it also has a new document manager. So what we're trying to do is like add a little bit more self-administering of like document management to the Traveler. And so I think it's pretty cool. Like you can archive documents, you can shred documents, you can move documents from A to B or B to C in terms of there's 3 folders on the device. And so there's just a little bit more sort of a self-administration of the documents so that, if people are really off grid, they can sort of manage that entirely on the device.
Great. Well, I know there's a very active FreeWrite community online. Obviously, as we mentioned earlier, you launched the original FreeWrite Smart Typewriter, which was the Hemming Write on Kickstarter. But your YouTube channel is very active, and your social media channels. And I know that there are published writers who are using and loving their FreeWrite devices. And as you mentioned, there have been hundreds of thousands of words created and written on FreeWrite devices. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the FreeWrite success stories with writers?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think we've had over 100 million words been written on FreeWrite devices. I'm super excited to see sort of how that number jumps once Traveler is released. I think we've had a lot of stories, and we've been trying to publicize them more because, we actually have a very small team. We went from 4 people to 6 people just in August, which is great. So now we actually have we have a dedicated marketing person, which I think is, probably you're seeing the results of a lot more activity, on social and in YouTube and all these different places. I don't know if I have any like super specific examples other than the fact that, we just try to highlight as many authors that are using our devices as possible. And, I think we try to post, get them to post their testimonials and say like, what has this done for you? And, usually what we're finding is that people say that it, doubles or sometimes even triples their writing output, which is obviously so awesome to hear. I mean, I think the biggest thing for us is to make sure that this product is a real writer's tool. I think when we first launched it, people were like, I don't know, is this a real thing or is this just like a nostalgic, toy or something? But we designed it, first and foremost as a real writer's tool. And so, that's what's most important to us. And I think, if you look on our YouTube page, everything's under Astra House if you want to check it out. But if you look at our YouTube channel under Astra House, you'll see, quite a few, real testimonials from customers that have been using them. And, Steven Seville is one example, who has been, successfully using the FreeWrite to write their books.
Great. Well, I'm curious, have you or someone on your team used the FreeWrite Traveler in public? Because the form factor for these devices is pretty unique. And I know I've gotten a lot of comments whenever I use my FreeWrite smart typewriter outside of my home office. I'm curious what the reaction has been for the Traveler. Obviously, we're in a pandemic, but I was curious.
Yeah, I haven't taken out the final device yet. And actually, I've only received sort of the final production product recently in the last couple of weeks. So, but that being said, we took the prototype that you see in all the, the promotional materials. We took that to Book Expo and Book Con, and it was right next to our FreeWrite Smart Typewriter, and it was pretty interesting to see people's experiences. And I think, one thing that we were maybe concerned with was that, here's this new product. It's sort of more laptop like, maybe that'll fit in, people's, sort of design sensibilities more. But it didn't actually seem like, it seemed like people just had sort of their preference, and it really depended on how people did their own writing. And I think that was our hope, but we weren't actually sure that was how it was going to end up. I think, there's some people that, write in very specific locations, like they have a writing cottage, or they write in their closet, or we've heard everything. And if there's one thing that I've learned through this entire process is that everybody has some sort of distraction-free method, whether it's using pen and paper, or they use distraction-free writing software, or they do actually use an old typewriter. Every writer has to have something that they do to help them stay focused. And so, yeah, I mean, having the Traveler out, it's been, back when we did this Book Expo and Book Con, it was super fun to sort of see people's reactions and like how they took to it versus the original FreeWrite. But, I think it remains to be seen what people actually say. I think, one of the things that we also thought about in designing Traveler is trying to, think about the industrial design of, in terms of how can we make something that still has our, brand in mind, but also sort of maybe is a little bit less provocative in terms of like being so different. And so I think we straddle that line really well. I think the Traveler, well, it's still very eye-catching, maybe too eye-catching, but it's super sleek. It's, it obviously has its folding. So it's sort of, kind of laptop-esque, but it very much is an Astro House FreeWrite product. And I think that we're super excited about that. And so, we've always, one sort of funny byproduct of the original FreeWrite design is that, we've heard from a lot of people, I think you mentioned it as well, like when people take it out to coffee shops, like they can't stop getting, bothered by people asking them what it is, or could they try it, or all these things. And so, that was obviously a sort of an unintended consequence of making a very provocative design. But, we'll see if that still is the case with Traveler.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned marketing earlier and your very active YouTube channel. I'm curious, and my day job is not this podcast. My day job is in marketing. I'm curious, have you ever thought about trying to get a FreeWrite smart typewriter to some really well-known writers like a Stephen King or a Lee Child?
Yeah, I'm like sort of embarrassed because I think we've been such a product-focused team for so long. And like I said, Nicole actually just recently joined our team, and she's actually the first full-time dedicated marketer that we've ever had, which is wild since we actually started in December 24. Well, we started in November 2014. So we've went for, 5+ years without a real full-time marketer. And so, we've sort of just taken the opportunities that have come our way, and we've been super fortunate in having a lot of opportunities. I mean, we've been, blessed by lots of press and sort of, doing a lot to support that. We've had some pretty high level. I mean, we've certainly had some A-level writers and celebrities buy our product before. Dawn Porter has been, has published, has put it on Instagram. We've had some other people that are a little more quiet about it that I don't know if I'm supposed to say or not. But maybe
you don't want to say, but one that literally just came to mind, I wasn't even thinking about this beforehand, is Tom Hanks, who is a huge typewriter fan.
Yeah. So Tom Hanks is a customer of ours. He was actually one of our first customers. And so, yeah, we've had people like that. I wish they would talk a little bit more about it, but
yeah, got to give them a push.
Yeah. Right. I think we're still trying to figure out how we can work with people like that. And so we're still trying. We're trying to figure it out.
Well, I'm curious if someone is on the more technology or geek side, can you run through the specs of the new FreeWrite Traveler?
Yeah. Well, what would you like to know?
Well, I mean, if someone's listening and just, you mentioned e-ink screen, and you mentioned what was the type of keyboard? I'm not a keyboard expert, so.
Yeah, so it's a scissor switch keyboard. I mean, laptop keyboards have been, in the technology news for quite a while now because of people's disdain for Mac's keyboards. And they came out, I think it was maybe 2016 or 17, with their butterfly keyboard, which, almost universally was hated by customers around the world. And what the byproduct of that is those keyboards have extremely low travel. So on the order of maybe some of them have less than 1 millimeter of keyboard travel. The original, the MacBooks have, I think, 0.8 millimeters of travel, which means that when you press the key, the difference between the top and sort of the quote unquote bottom of the key press is 0.8 millimeters. And so what that actually means is it feels like you're kind of like typing on a piece of wood or something. And versus, a mechanical keyboard, which has something on the order of 4 millimeters of travel. So huge difference there. And also when you're a touch typist with a mechanical keyboard, you're actually sort of trained to not press all the way down until it stops. You really are trying to just press it down so that it registers. And in that way, you're never actually hitting the bottom of the keyboard. But anyway, that's sort of advanced mechanical keyboard in the weeds.
So one question about the technology specs. So you mentioned that there's flash storage that saves while you're writing if you're not if you're out of a Wi-Fi range. So can you give people a sense of document, how many documents can be stored locally, that type of thing?
Yeah. So we say that there's room for over 1 million plus pages of documents. So we try not to get too focused on actual technology specs like gigabytes or amount of RAM. But I mean, like I said, there's room for over 1 million documents on the device. We say over 4 weeks of battery life, and that's something that we're still, constantly working to improve. And we sort of have a, disclaimer that's with regular usage.
Right.
Because the cool thing about e-ink is that it doesn't require power unless you're actually updating the screen.
Got it.
And so we can make the device super low power, which is great. And then, it's a 6-inch e-ink display, really great mechanical keyboard. Not mechanical keyboard, a scissor switch keyboard.
Right.
That has 2.5 millimeters of travel, which is, I think, probably the most amount of travel in any modern laptop keyboard. And so people are really going to feel that difference. It's very different in terms of actual tactile feel of the keyboard. It's less than 2 pounds and less. It's about an inch at the thickest and significantly less than an inch on the side, since it sort of has a bow shape on the top. And so it's very svelte.
That's great. Well, I know that you said you've been working for 2 years and it's just come out, the FreeWrite Traveler. I'm curious, have you thought at all beyond that in terms of your product pipeline? Have you thought, um, are you going to do other types of devices and other form factors?
Well, yeah, I mean, I have a long list
Okay.
of products. I can't divulge anything yet, but
Okay.
yeah, I think we're constantly trying to think of, the next product and the next improvement. I mean, I'm still trying to breathe from, 2 years of very hard work on this product, but yeah, we always have, new developments, and I don't want to say anything because
Yeah, of course.
then people get in their heads like, oh, I'm not going to buy this one because I'm going to buy the next one. It's like,
Oh,
no,
no. Yeah, yeah.
we don't know. We don't know when the next one's going to be. So
It could be years and years.
it could be years, and more likely than not, it's going to be something that's not going to replace Traveler or FreeWrite. So we're very. I mean, Traveler, the first generation of Traveler that's coming out is far superior than the first generation of FreeWrite. So we're very proud of that. And I think we have a great hardware platform, and we also have the ability to do over the air updates with software. So we're going to be constantly improving the software with Traveler, and that's really going to be our focus, for the foreseeable future.
Great. Well, if someone is intrigued and interested about the FreeWrite Traveler, where should they go online to learn more about this new distraction-free writing device?
Yeah, everything is at getfreewrite.com/traveler with one L. So that's getfreewrite.com is our, main e-commerce website. There you can check out FreeWrite, you can check out the new Traveler, you can check out some of the accessories that we have, some of the testimonials, and you can see how people are actually using the devices in their writing process. And so, yeah, if anybody is interested, I'd encourage you to go to getfreewrite.com/traveler. We only ever make sort of limited batch runs. And we do, despite my best efforts, we do end up running out of stock. And so, I just encourage people to check it out, as soon as they can.
Great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Adam Leeb, the CEO of Astro House. Astro House's FreeWrite Traveler has just launched, as we've been discussing. And Adam, thanks for doing this interview.
This has been really great. Thanks so much.